It started with a smell, a sharp, acrid tang that clawed its way into my lungs and refused to let go. In the winter of 2017, I was trudging up the stairs of my crumbling apartment building in central New Jersey, the kind of place where the air itself felt heavy with neglect. The 3-story brick structure loomed like a forgotten relic, its hallways lined with flickering bulbs and doors scarred by years of careless tenants. I lived there with Nick, my roommate, a night shift security guard, who left me alone most evenings. That night, a Thursday in early February, I was late getting home, my boots scraping against the chipped concrete steps. The smell hit me, halfway up, burned rubber, laced with a sickly citrus cleaner, a combination so distinct it felt like a memory I'd never owned. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from something deeper, something that made my skin prickle and my thoughts stutter. I stopped, one hand gripping the rusted railing, and for a moment I wasn't sure where I was. Not just in the building, but in time itself. The hallway on the 3rd floor stretched before me, dim and endless, the kind of corridor that seemed to swallow sound. Each step I took echoed too loudly, as if the building were listening. The air was thick, heavy, with that unnatural smell, and as I moved toward my apartment, a wave of recognition crashed over me, so violent I nearly dropped my keys. I'd been here before, not just in this hallway, but in this exact moment. The scuff of my boots, the faint buzz of the overhead light, the way the shadows clung to the walls like damp moss. I stopped 5 feet from my door, my breath shallow, and I knew what would happen next. The light above me would flicker twice sharp and deliberate. A woman's voice would drift up from the floor below, muffled but sharp, followed by a laugh that sounded too hollow. Then, at the far end of the hallway, something heavy would fall, a dull, metallic thud that would linger in the air like a warning. I stood frozen, my heart hammering, and it happened exactly as I knew it would. The light blinked. The woman's voice cut through the silence, and the thud reverberated down the corridor, shaking something loose inside me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the sagging couch in our living room, staring at the peeling wallpaper, trying to make sense of it. Was it a dream I'd forgotten? A coincidence? But the details were too precise, too vivid. The smell, the sounds, the way the hallway seemed to pulse with a life of its own. They weren't guesses. They were certainties. I tried to shake it off, chalk it up to exhaustion or stress. But the next night, it happened again. I was sprawled on the couch, a half-eaten container of lo mein on the coffee table, the TV droning through some late-night sitcom. The air shifted heavy and electric, and I knew the next scene before the actors spoke. The punchline, the canned laughter, the exact moment my phone would buzz on the nightstand with a text from Nick. I grabbed a notebook and scribbled it down, testing myself. The dialogue unfolded, word for word. The laughter hit on cue, and my phone lit up at 11:43 p.m. Nick's name flashing on the screen. My hands shook as I wrote, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing something I shouldn't. For 5 days, these moments multiplied, each one sharper and more invasive than the last. I began to live in fragments, caught in a loop of anticipation and dread. I knew the exact second the neighbor's dog would start barking its frantic yips, cutting through the night. I predicted the time Nick would stumble through the door, his keys jangling in a rhythm I'd heard before. I filled pages with these premonitions, each one a tiny fracture in the fabric of my reality. They weren't memories. They were warnings, reminders of moments I hadn't lived yet, but somehow already knew. Stop and listen to the silence, I told myself, because the silence was where the truth hid. The hallway became my obsession. I'd stand in it for hours, staring at the flickering light, waiting for the next ripple of déjà vu to pull me under. The building felt alive, its walls humming with secrets, its shadows shifting in ways that defied the light. Then the dreams began. Every night, the same scene played out with merciless precision. I was lying in bed, the room cloaked in darkness, when the door creaked open. Nick stood in the doorway, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead, his eyes too wide, too empty. "There's someone in the building," he said, his voice flat, like a recording, stripped of emotion. I'd ask, who my voice trembling, but he'd only stare, his gaze boring into me until I woke, gasping the echo of his words ringing in my ears. The dream was so vivid, I could feel the dampness of his skin, smell the faint metallic tang in the air. It played every night, relentless, until I began to dread sleep itself. I'd lie awake, watching the door, half expecting it to swing open. "You need to remember this," a voice whispered in my head. Not mine, but something older, something that knew more than I did. On the 5th night, the boundary between dream and reality dissolved. At 3:12 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of my door opening. The air was thick, oppressive, and there was Nick standing exactly as he had in the dream, pale, sweating, his voice a hollow echo. "There's someone in the building." My blood turned to ice. I grabbed the baseball bat from under my bed, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grip it. "Follow him," the voice in my head commanded, and I did my bare feet slapping against the cold floor. The hallway was darker than it should have been, the shadows pooling in corners like spilled ink. Nick pointed toward the stairwell, his finger trembling. I strained my eyes, searching for movement, but there was nothing, just an unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. The shadows didn't move the way shadows should. They seemed to breathe, to shift, as if they were watching us. We stood there, frozen. The silence so heavy, it pressed against my chest. I whispered to Nick, asking what he'd seen, but he didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the stairwell, wide and unblinking. I called the police, my voice shaking as I tried to explain something I didn't understand. They came, searched the building, found nothing. No signs of a break-in, no footprints, no evidence of anyone but us. As they left, I turned to Nick, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been dreaming about this," I said. "Every night. You, the door, those exact words." He looked at me, his face ashen, and said, "I've been having them too." The words hung between us, heavy and final. We didn't speak after that. We went back to our apartment, locked the door, and sat in silence until dawn. The déjà vu stopped that night as suddenly as it had begun. The hallway returned to its mundane decay. The smells faded. The lights flickered without meaning. But I was changed. I couldn't walk through that corridor without feeling it, the tug of something unseen, something waiting. I began to see the world differently, as if reality were a thin veneer stretched over something vast and incomprehensible. What if memories aren't ours alone, I wondered. What if they're echoes from other versions of ourselves, lives stacked like pages in a book, each one bleeding into the next? The hallway, I realized, was a seam, a place where the fabric of reality had worn thin, letting glimpses of other timelines slip through. 6 months later, I moved out. I couldn't stay in that building, couldn't face the hallway without feeling like I was standing on the edge of a void. I found a new apartment, a clean, modern place with bright lights and no history. But I couldn't escape the pull of that old building. I'd drive past it, sometimes slowing down as I approached my hands, gripping the steering wheel. "Go inside," the voice whispered, the same one that had urged me to follow Nick. I never did, but each time I felt it stronger, a compulsion, a need to return, to face whatever was waiting. It wasn't a person or a ghost. It was a choice, a moment I hadn't yet lived, but was destined to confront. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, I feel it again. A flicker of recognition, a sound that doesn't belong, a shadow that moves too slowly. I'll pause, my heart racing, and wonder if I'm about to remember something before it happens. Listen to the silence, I tell myself, because the silence is where the truth hides. I think about Nick, about the dreams we shared, about the hallway that seemed to know us better than we knew ourselves. I wonder if he feels it too, wherever he is. I wonder if he's ever gone back. The last time I drove past the building, I stopped. I parked across the street, staring at the chipped brick facade, the warped windows, the door that led to the stairwell. The air was heavy, the way it had been that night. And for a moment, I saw it, the hallway, stretching out before me, its shadows alive with possibility. Step inside, the voice urged, and my hand reached for the car door. I didn't move. Not yet. But I know deep down that one day I will. One day I'll walk that hallway again, and when I do, I'll find the seam, the place where my life splits, where every choice I didn't make waits to be claimed. And when that door opens, when I hear those words again, I don't know if I'll have the strength to turn away. The air tasted wrong that day, like rust and forgotten promises, as if the forest itself was exhaling a warning I couldn't hear. My name is Ryan, and I was 17 when the woods near our house stopped being just trees and shadows. They became something else, a mirror, reflecting moments I hadn't lived, a maze of memories that weren't mine. It was October, the kind of crisp gray afternoon where the world feels too still, too heavy, like it's holding its breath. My brother, Chris, 19, and restless, had been talking about a trail deep in the forest for weeks. "There's a house out there," he said, eyes glinting with the kind of mischief that made me follow him, even when I knew better. Old, abandoned, maybe haunted. I laughed it off, but something in his voice, sharp and daring, hooked me. We didn't know the forest was waiting for us, that it had already seen us coming. Chris and I lived in a small town, the kind where boredom was a disease, and the woods were our only cure. The trail started behind our house, a narrow dirt path snaking through pines and oaks, their branches clawing at the sky. We packed light water flashlights, a half-hearted promise to our mom we'd be back before dark. The leaves crunched underfoot, painting the ground in shades of fire and blood. It was beautiful, but the beauty felt like a lie, a mask over something older, hungrier. 10 minutes in the air shifted. It wasn't cold, not exactly, but it pressed against my skin, heavy and damp, like a hand resting too long on my shoulder. I stopped, my breath catching, and looked at Chris, who was a few steps ahead, rambling about some girl from school. "You good?" he asked, glancing back. I nodded, but I wasn't. Something was wrong. The trail, the trees, the way the light slanted through the branches, it all felt like a photograph I'd seen. Before a moment I'd already lived. I shook it off, blaming the chill, but then I saw it, a broken fence post, half buried in the dirt, its jagged edge catching the sun. I knew it was there before I saw it. Not a guess, not a hunch, a certainty, sharp and cold, like a blade pressed to my spine. "Ryan, you coming?" Chris's voice snapped me back. I mumbled something and kept walking, but the feeling grew spreading like ink through water. Every step was a memory I hadn't earned. A tree with a gnarled knot like an eye. A cluster of rocks shaped like a claw. I knew them not as landmarks, but as moments, specific, vivid, like I'd walked this path 100 times in a life I couldn't remember. The forest was speaking to me, and I didn't want to hear it. An hour into the hike, the trail widened, and there it was, the house. It squatted in a clearing, a 2-story relic of peeling green paint and broken promises. Dead vines clung to its walls, twisting like veins under skin. The front step was cracked, the windows dark and hollow, except for one upstairs shattered its edges, glinting like teeth. I knew this house, not from stories or rumors, but from somewhere deeper, a place in my mind that felt like a locked room I'd never opened. My stomach twisted, not with fear, but with recognition. I'd been here before. The thought was absurd. I'd never set foot on this trail, but it clung to me heavy and undeniable. Chris was already halfway to the porch, his flashlight swinging lazily. "Yo, this place is creepy as hell," he called, grinning. I wanted to scream at him, to stop, to turn back, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I followed each step, pulling me closer to a truth I wasn't ready to face. The porch groaned under our weight, the air thick with the smell of rot and something sharper, like old metal, left in the rain. The front door hung ajar, a sliver of darkness beyond it, inviting us in. It was waiting for us. Inside, the silence was a living thing, pressing against my ears, swallowing every sound. Broken furniture littered the floor chairs with missing legs. A table split down the middle. Wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips, revealing patches of mold that looked like faces distorted and screaming. A staircase spiraled up on the left, its banister splintered, leading to a darkness that felt alive. I remembered this room, not as a vague impression, but in detail, the way the light fell through a cracked window, the exact pattern of the wallpaper's decay, the faint hum of something unseen, like a heartbeat buried in the walls. Chris moved ahead, poking at a rusted fireplace with his flashlight. "This place is a dump," he said, but his voice was tight, like he felt it too, the weight of the house, the way it watched. I tried to focus, to anchor myself in the present, but the memories kept coming unbidden, relentless. I saw the kitchen before we reached it, its cabinets hanging open like mouths, the sink stained with something too dark to be rust. I saw the hallway, narrow and suffocating, with a single closed door at the end. I knew what was behind it. Not a guess, not a fear, a fact as real as the ground beneath my feet. "Ryan, you're freaking me out," Chris said, stopping in the hallway. I hadn't realized I was staring at the door. My hands clenched so tight, my nails bit into my palms. "What's wrong with you?" I swallowed, trying to find words for something I didn't understand. "I've been here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I remember this place, the kitchen, the fireplace, and there's a woman upstairs." Chris froze, his flashlight beam trembling on the floor. "What the hell are you talking about?" His tone was half laugh, half edge, like he thought I was messing with him, but wasn't sure. I wanted to explain, to tell him about the memories that weren't mine, the images that flooded my mind like a broken dam. But how could I? I remembered a woman, her silhouette framed against a window, her hair grayish blonde, her presence a weight that crushed the air from my lungs. I'd never seen her, but I knew her the way you know a nightmare you've had too many times. "I'm not trying to scare you," I said, forcing the words out. I know she's up there." Chris stared at me, his grin gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in him before: uncertainty. He opened his mouth to say something, but then we heard it, a sound from upstairs, soft but deliberate, like a footstep on old wood. It wasn't a creak, not a groan, just a presence, a movement that didn't belong. The air grew colder, the silence heavier, and I felt it again, that certainty, that memory of a moment I hadn't lived. She was there. Chris's flashlight flicked toward the staircase. "You're full of it," he said, but his voice cracked. "Probably just a raccoon or something." He took a step toward the stairs, and panic surged through me. "Don't," I said, grabbing his arm. "We need to leave." But Chris shook me off, his jaw set. "You stay here if you're scared. I'm checking it out." He didn't understand. The house wasn't just a place. It was a trap, a loop, a moment frozen in time, and we were walking right into it. The staircase was narrow. the air thick with dust, and something sweeter, like decay, left to fester. Chris went first, his flashlight cutting through the gloom, each step a reminder that we were going somewhere we shouldn't. I followed my heart, pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. I knew where we were going. The last room on the right, its door slightly open, a sliver of gray light spilling out. I'd seen it before, not in life, but in that locked room in my mind, the one that held truths I wasn't supposed to know. At the top of the stairs, Chris hesitated, his bravado fading. "Stay here," he said, glancing back at me. I shook my head, unable to speak, unable to tell him that staying behind wasn't any safer. He moved toward the room, his hand reaching for the door. I remembered this moment. The way the light shifted, the way the air grew still, the way the door opened without resistance, revealing something that didn't belong in this world. Chris pushed the door open, and time slowed. She was there. A woman standing by the window, her back to us, her hair grayish blonde, shoulder length, catching the faint light like ash. She didn't move, didn't turn, but her presence filled the room, heavy and wrong, like a memory that had clawed its way into reality. I knew her, not her face, not her name, but her existence, her place in this moment, as if she'd been waiting for us all along. Chris froze, his flashlight dropping to the floor, its beam spinning wildly across the walls. He saw her, too. Not a raccoon, not a trick of the light. A woman real and impossible, standing like a statue in a room that shouldn't exist. I remembered this. The way her silhouette burned into my mind, the way the air tasted of fear and metal, the way the house seemed to hum with a life of its own. "Run," Chris said, his voice low urgent, not a shout, but a command that cut through the silence. I remembered this too. We turned stumbling over each other, racing down the stairs, the house alive around us, its walls pulsing with something I couldn't name. We burst through the front door, the forest swallowing us as we ran branches, tearing at our clothes, the trail blurring beneath our feet. We didn't stop, not until the house was gone, not until the air was just air again, not until the memories stopped screaming. We collapsed on the trail, gasping our breaths, clouding in the cold. The forest was silent now, the house a distant shadow we couldn't see, but could still feel. "What did you see?" I asked, my voice shaking. Chris looked at me, his face pale, his eyes wide with something I'd never seen in him before: fear, real and raw. "There was a woman he said. By the window. She didn't move, just stood there like she was waiting. I knotted my throat tight. I knew. Not because he told me, but because I'd seen her too. Not with my eyes, but with that part of me that remembered things I hadn't lived. Her hair, I said, grayish blonde. Right? Chris's eyes widened, and for a moment I thought he'd accuse me of lying, of playing some sick joke. But he didn't. How did you know? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. How do you explain a memory that isn't yours? How do you tell your brother that the house wasn't just haunted, but alive? A place where time didn't work right, where moments looped and twisted, trapping you in a version of reality that wasn't supposed to exist. I remembered her, and she remembered me. For days, weeks, months, Chris swore he wasn't lying, that he'd seen her, that the house was real, that the woman was real. I believed him, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The memories were too vivid, too specific, too heavy to be coincidence. The fence post, the tree, the house, the woman, they weren't just déjà vu. They were warnings, echoes from a life I hadn't lived, a life where we didn't make it out. We never went back to the trail, never spoke of the house again. Not really, but it followed us. Sometimes at night, I'd wake up with the taste of rust in my mouth, the smell of decay in my nose. The image of that woman burned into my mind. She was still there, waiting, watching, remembering. Chris changed to quieter, jumpier, like he carried the house with him, a weight he couldn't shake. I started researching, digging into old records, stories about the forest, the house, the woman. There wasn't much, just whispers of a place where time didn't work, right? Where people went in and came out wrong, if they came out at all. One story buried in a local archive mentioned a woman who'd lived in the house decades ago, a recluse who'd lost everything, her family, her mind, her life. Her hair was grayish blonde. The story didn't say how she died, only that the house was never the same after her. What if she never left? What if the house wasn't just a place, but a moment, a loop, a memory that refused to fade? What if we'd walked into her reality, her version of time, and brought a piece of it back with us? What if she's still waiting, not for us, but for the version of us that didn't run? I don't know what déjà vu is anymore. I used to think it was just a glitch, a trick of the brain, but now I'm not so sure. The forest remembers. The house remembers. And sometimes, when the air tastes wrong, when the shadows move too slowly, I feel it a tug, a pull, a memory that isn't mine. The house is still out there, and it knows my name. The snow fell like whispers from a forgotten sky, each flake a secret I wasn't meant to hear. In the winter of 2020, when the world was still clawing its way out of lockdown's grip, I found myself driving through the quiet streets of a small town just outside Scranton, Pennsylvania. The dashboard clock blinked 1:27 a.m. Its red glow the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. The roads were slick, coated in a thin layer of fresh snow that shimmered under the street lights, and the air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I was alone, or so I thought, until the moment I approached that intersection, a place where time seemed to bend, and the line between life and death blurred into something I could almost touch. I'd driven through that four-way crossing hundreds of times. It was infamous in our town, a cursed patch of asphalt marked by faded stop signs and a history of crumpled metal. No traffic lights, no cameras, just a silent agreement between drivers to trust each other's judgment. On snowy nights like this, it was a gamble. You'd squint through the flakes, praying the other guy would stop, knowing full well some didn't. I'd heard the stories teenagers T-boned on prom night, a delivery truck flipped in '98, a mother of 3 who never made it home. The intersection didn't care who you were. It took what it wanted. That night, something shifted. As my headlights swept across the stop sign, a weight settled in my chest. Not fear, but something deeper, like a memory I hadn't lived yet. My hands tightened on the wheel, and my foot eased off the gas before I even knew why. The world slowed, each snowflake hanging in the air like a frozen warning. I felt it then, déjà vu, but not the fleeting kind that brushes past like a stranger. This was a sledgehammer, a certainty that I'd stood at this exact moment before in this exact car, with the same snow falling in the same pattern. And I knew what was coming. A black pickup truck, its engine roaring like a beast unchained, would tear through the stop sign on my left. Its headlights would blind me, and the impact would come from the driver's side. Metal, screaming glass, shattering my ribs, cracking under the force of the airbag. I could feel the blood on my face, taste the copper in my mouth, hear the silence that followed, broken only by the hiss of a dying engine. None of it had happened, but I remembered it as real as the cold leather under my palms. Listen to that instinct, a voice whispered inside me. Not mine, but familiar, like a friend I'd forgotten. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding slightly on the ice. The intersection lay empty, the stop signs staring back like sentinels. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it, that the stress of the pandemic, endless news cycles, empty streets, the weight of isolation had finally cracked me. Then it came. The black truck exploded through the crossing, its tires chewing the snow. No hesitation, no regard for the stop sign. Its headlights grazed my windshield, a fleeting glare that felt like a warning shot. If I hadn't stopped, it would have hit me square, no question. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the certainty that I'd seen this before, lived. It died in it. I pulled over to the shoulder, my hands shaking, as I watched the truck's taillights vanish into the storm. The snow kept falling, indifferent, burying the tracks of what could have been. I sat there for what felt like hours, though the clock said only minutes had passed. My breath fogged the windows, and the heater's hum was the only sound in the world. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd heard about a similar accident, or maybe my brain, fried from months of lockdown, was stitching together fragments of fear. But deep down, I knew better. That wasn't a guess. It was a memory, one that didn't belong to this version of me. The next few nights, I took the same route home, half expecting the truck to reappear, half hoping it wouldn't. The déjà vu didn't stop. It grew, spreading like a stain. At a red light, I knew the exact song that would crackle through my radio, some forgotten 90s hit I hadn't heard in years before the first note played. I saw a woman in a red coat walking her dog across the street, her silhouette clear in my mind before she stepped into view. Each moment felt like a script. I was doomed to follow a play I'd rehearsed in another life. I wasn't living anymore. I was reenacting. Then the dreams came. They started simple flashes of that intersection, the truck, the crash. But each night, they grew sharper, more vivid, until I could feel the steering wheel twisting in my hands, hear the crunch of metal, smell the burning rubber. In one dream, I stumbled from the wreckage, my legs unsteady, and saw my own body still slumped in the driver's seat. My face was wrong, eyes glassy, a gash across my temple, leaking blood onto the dashboard. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, and the world dissolved into snow. The fifth night was the worst. I woke up drenched in sweat, the dream still clinging to me like damp cloth. In it, I'd walked away from the crash, but the intersection wasn't empty. A figure stood at the edge, cloaked in shadow, watching me. It didn't move, didn't speak, but its presence was a weight, a reminder that I wasn't supposed to be here. I swore I'd never take that route again. I'd drive the long way, take the highway, anything to avoid that cursed crossing. That morning, I got a text from my friend Jake, a guy I hadn't talked to in weeks. Heard about the crash last night. Same spot you always drive through. My stomach dropped. I called him, my voice unsteady, and he told me the details. A blue sedan, same make and color as mine, had been hit at that intersection around 1:30 a.m. The driver, a guy in his 30s, didn't make it. A black pickup truck had run the stop sign just like I'd seen. The police were still looking for the truck's driver, who'd fled the scene. I didn't tell Jake about the déjà vu, the dreams, the certainty that I'd dodged my own death. How could I? It sounded insane, even to me. But I couldn't shake the question. Was that supposed to be me? Had I slipped through some crack in reality? A glitch that let me rewrite the ending? Or was I just lucky? While another version of me, another life, another timeline paid the price. Jake's call didn't just shake me. It reminded me of something he'd told me years before, a story I'd brushed off as drunken nonsense at the time. He'd been working late shifts at a diner off Route 6, a greasy spoon, where truckers and insomniacs gathered to kill time. One night, a regular came in, an older guy named Tom, who always sat at the counter with a coffee and a newspaper he never read. Tom was quiet, kept to himself. But that night, he looked rattled, his hands trembling as he stirred his coffee. Jake asked if he was okay, and Tom started talking low and urgent, like he needed to get it out before he lost his nerve. He said he'd been driving home from his daughter's place in Wilkes-Barre, taking the back roads to avoid construction. There was a stretch of road, a lonely strip flanked by pines where the street lights flickered and the radio turned to static. As he approached a sharp curve, he felt it déjà vu, so strong it was like stepping into a memory. He knew the curve, the trees, the way the moonlight hit the pavement. And he knew a deer would leap from the woods right into his path. Tom said he'd never driven that road before. Not at night, not in years. But the certainty was unshakable. He saw the deer in his mind, its eyes glowing in his headlights, the swerve, the tires screeching, the guardrail giving way. He felt the drop, the car tumbling into the ravine below the cold water of the creek, seeping in as he fought to breathe. It was so real, he could smell the pine and the blood. He slowed down, barely crawling around the curve, and there it was, a deer frozen in the road, staring at him. He stopped, heart hammering, and watched it bound back into the trees. No crash, no ravine, no water. He sat there, engine idling, until another car honked behind him. When he got home, he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the crash, feeling it like a memory he'd lived and escaped. Tom told Jake he'd started taking a different route after that, even if it added an hour to his drive. He didn't trust that road anymore, didn't trust himself. Jake thought it was just a weird coincidence, maybe stress from Tom's long hours at the factory. But a week later, he saw a story in the local paper. A car had gone off that same curve, same time of night. The driver, a woman in her 40s, hadn't made it. The article mentioned skid marks, a possible animal in the road. Jake never told Tom, but he said it gave him chills, like Tom had seen something he wasn't supposed to. I hadn't thought about Tom's story in years, not until Jake mentioned the crash at my intersection. It felt too similar, too precise. Had Tom slipped through the same kind of crack I had? Was déjà vu more than a brain glitch, a fleeting misfire? Maybe it was a warning, a message from another version of ourselves, one that didn't make it. After Jake's call, I couldn't drive past that intersection without feeling it, the tug, the weight, the certainty that something was watching. I stuck to the highway, adding miles to my commute. But even that didn't help. The déjà vu followed me. At a gas station, I knew the clerk would drop a stack of receipts before it happened. On a walk, I predicted the exact moment a crow would take flight from a telephone pole. Each time it was like stepping into a moment I'd already lived a loop I couldn't break. The dreams didn't stop either. They changed, grew stranger. Now the figure at the intersection wasn't just watching. It moved closer. Its face obscured its steps, silent in the snow. In one dream, it reached out, and I woke up gasping, my hand stinging like I'd been touched. I started avoiding sleep, chugging coffee, leaving the lights on. But the exhaustion only made it worse. The world felt thin, like a sheet of glass, ready to crack. I started researching, digging into anything that might explain it. Near-death experiences, quantum physics, alternate timelines. None of it made sense. But it was all I had. I found forums where people described similar things. Memories of accidents that never happened. Dreams of their own deaths. Moments where time seemed to stutter. One woman wrote about a fire she remembered in her apartment, down to the smell of smoke and the sound of sirens. She moved out the next day, and a week later, her building burned. Another guy talked about a heart attack he felt coming clear as day, and went to the hospital just in time. They all had one thing in common: the certainty that they'd cheated fate, and the fear that it wasn't over. I don't know what's true anymore. Maybe time isn't a straight line, but a tangle of threads, each one a life, a choice, a death. Maybe déjà vu is what happens when those threads brush against each other, when one version of you screams a warning to another. Or maybe I'm just losing it, seeing patterns, where there's only chaos. I haven't driven through that intersection since. I've thought about it late at night when the house is too quiet and the snow starts falling again. Part of me wants to go back to stand at that crossing and see if the figure from my dreams is still there. But another part, the part that remembers the crash, the blood, the silence, tells me to stay away. Because if I go back, if I step into that moment again, I don't know if I'll come out the same, or if I'll come out at all. The snow keeps falling, and somewhere at the edge of my mind, I hear the roar of a black truck waiting. Every night, as I walked the dim corridors of that crumbling care home, I felt it a pulse beneath the silence, like the building itself was holding its breath. But it wasn't until Miss Adelaide looked at me, her eyes sharp as broken glass, and said, "You've been here before, haven't you?" that I realized the walls weren't just old. They were listening. I worked the overnight shift at a long-term care home in upstate New York, a place so worn it seemed to sag under the weight of its own history. The building was a relic, peeling paint, cracked linoleum floors, and air that always smelled faintly of antiseptic and decay. It was the kind of place where time felt stuck, where the elderly residents drifted through their days like ghosts tethered to their routines. I was in my mid-20s, fresh out of college, taking the job because it paid better than waiting tables. I didn't believe in ghosts or curses then. I thought the worst thing about the place was the loneliness that clung to every room. My rounds started at midnight, a predictable loop through the East Wing. Most residents slept soundly, their breaths soft behind closed doors. But there was one woman, Miss Adelaide, who never seemed to rest. She was 87, frail but sharp, with silver hair pinned neatly despite the hour. Her room number, 214, was at the end of the hall, marked by a faded brass plate that caught the flicker of the overhead lights. On her nightstand sat a single photograph, yellowed, and creased a young boy in overalls, smiling at the camera. She called him her grandson, but no one ever came to visit. Not once. I'd find her awake some nights, sitting upright in her bed, her hands folded in her lap. She'd hum a tune, slow, mournful, like something you'd hear in a dream you couldn't shake. It wasn't a song I recognized, just a string of notes that seemed to coil around the room, sinking into the walls. The first time I heard it, I felt a chill, like the air had thickened. I'd ask if she needed anything, and she'd smile, her eyes distant but kind. "Not tonight, dear," she'd say, and I'd move on, the humming fading behind me. But one night, something changed. It was 2:15 a.m., the hour when the care home felt most like a tomb. The hallway was silent, except for the faint buzz of a dying fluorescent bulb. I reached Miss Adelaide's door, half expecting to find her asleep. Instead, she was sitting up, her gaze fixed on the ceiling. Her humming was louder, sharper, like it was pulling at something inside me. I knocked softly and stepped inside. Miss Adelaide. "Everything okay?" She turned to me, her eyes catching the dim light like polished stone. "You already asked me that," she said, her voice steady, deliberate. "You ask every night, but tonight is different." The words landed like a weight in my chest. I laughed nervously, brushing it off as confusion, dementia, maybe, though her file never mentioned it. "Just checking on you," I said, offering a glass of water. She shook her head, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You should remember this part," she added, then resumed her humming, louder, now the notes twisting like smoke. I left her room, my skin prickling. The hallway felt narrower, the shadows deeper. I told myself it was nothing, just an old woman's ramblings. But her words stuck with me, looping in my mind like her tune. "You've been here before, haven't you?" I hadn't. I was sure of it. Yet the certainty in her voice gnawed at me like a splinter I couldn't pull out. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same room, same humming. I stood at her door, my hand hesitating on the knob. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing against my chest. When I stepped inside, Miss Adelaide was waiting, her eyes locked on me before I even spoke. "You already asked me that," she said verbatim, her voice a perfect echo of the night before. "Tonight is different." My mouth went dry. I didn't ask her anything this time, just nodded, muttered something about checking the chart, and backed out. The humming followed me down the hall, louder, like it was chasing me. I started dreading room 214. The other residents were predictable. Mr. Larson snored through his oxygen mask. Mrs. Carter muttered in her sleep. But Miss Adelaide was different. Her presence felt like a puzzle I wasn't meant to solve. I began noticing things I hadn't before, the way the lights flickered only near her room, the way the clock in the break room always seemed to slow around 2 a.m. I told my supervisor, Karen, about Miss Adelaide's words. She laughed, her voice tired. "Old folks say strange things. Don't let it get to you." But I saw the way her eyes darted to the hallway, like she felt it too. On the third night, I couldn't avoid it. My rounds brought me to her door, and the humming was already spilling out, louder than ever, like it was woven into the air itself. I gripped my clipboard, my knuckles white, and stepped inside. Miss Adelaide was sitting up, but this time Her hands were clutching the photograph of the boy. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I swear, they weren't hers, like something else was looking through them. "You've been here before," she said, her voice low, almost a growl. "You keep coming back. Why do you keep coming back?" I froze, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Miss Adelaide." "I'm just doing my rounds," I stammered. She leaned forward, her gaze pinning me in place. "You think you're in control, but you're not. You've seen this room. You've heard my song. You'll hear it again." Her words weren't confused or frail. They were certain, like she was reading my future. I backed out, nearly tripping over the threshold, and shut the door. The humming didn't stop. It echoed in my head, even after I reached the break room, even after I splashed cold water on my face. The next morning, I learned she was gone. Miss Adelaide had passed in her sleep at 1:50 a.m., just before my rounds. Her bed was empty, the sheets neatly folded, her belongings already boxed by the day shift. The photograph of the boy was nowhere to be found. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt hollow, like something was watching me from the corners of the room. I couldn't shake her voice, her words, her song. "You'll hear it again." I started digging through the care home's records, anything to make sense of it. The archives were a mess. Dusty binders stuffed with handwritten notes, some dating back decades. I found Miss Adelaide's file, sparse but unsettling. She'd been a resident for 15 years, admitted after a fall that left her frail. No family listed, no visitors. But there were other notes, buried in the margins of older reports. A nurse in 2010 wrote, "Adelaide repeated my name before I introduced myself. Said I'd spill coffee at 2:45 a.m. I did." Another from 2013. She told me I'd take my break at 3:07. Looked at my watch, 3:07, exactly. The most chilling was from 2008. Adelaide said, "I remember this version. You leave soon." I was fired 2 days later. My hands shook as I read. These weren't coincidences. Miss Adelaide wasn't just predicting, she was seeing something, living it over and over, like a record stuck on the same groove. I started asking around discreetly to other staff. A janitor who'd worked there for 20 years told me he'd heard her humming in empty hallways, even when her room was vacant. A former nurse, now retired, said she'd dreamed of Miss Adelaide's song the night before she quit a dream, where the care home's walls bled, and the boy from the photograph stood at her bedside, silent. The more I learned, the more I felt it. The care home wasn't just old. It was wrong. The air was too thick, the shadows too sharp. I started having dreams of my own. In them, I walked the east wing, but the hallway stretched forever doors, multiplying on either side. Miss Adelaide stood at the end, humming, her eyes black as ink. She'd point to a door I hadn't seen before, one that pulsed with a faint red light. "Go inside," she'd say. "You've been there before." I'd wake up, gasping, the humming still ringing in my ears. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I was alone on shift. The other aide called out sick. The clock read 2 a.m., and the hallway was quieter than it should have been. No hum of the heater, no creak of settling wood. I walked my rounds, my flashlight cutting through the dark. When I reached room 214, I stopped. The brass plate was gone, replaced by a blank square of wood. I don't know why I opened the door. Maybe I needed to prove she was gone, that it was over. But when I stepped inside, the room wasn't empty. The bed was made, but the air was heavy, like it was holding a secret. On the nightstand sat the photograph of the boy, its edges curling, like it had been touched 1,000 times. And then I heard it, the humming soft at first, then louder, wrapping around me like a net. It wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from inside me, vibrating in my bones. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering, and for a split second, I saw her, Miss Adelaide, standing in the corner, her eyes locked on mine. "You've been here before," she whispered, and the room went dark. I don't remember running, but I was in the break room when I came to, my hands shaking, my shirt damp with sweat. The clock read 2:15 a.m. I quit the next day. I told Karen I couldn't handle the hours, but she looked at me like she knew. "You're not the first," she said, and handed me my last paycheck. I work in IT now, behind a desk far from that place. But the humming never left. It comes to me in quiet moments when I'm alone, when the world feels too still. I hear it in my dreams, in the static of my computer, in the pause between heartbeats. I've tried to forget to tell myself it was stress, exhaustion, anything but the truth. But I've started noticing things, moments that feel too familiar, like I'm reliving them. The way my coffee spills at exactly 10:17 a.m. The way a stranger's voice on the phone sounds like they're reading a script I've heard before. I looked into Déjà vu, desperate for answers. Some say it's a brain glitch, neurons misfiring. Others say it's a glimpse into parallel lives' timelines, bleeding into each other. But I think Miss Adelaide knew something we don't. I think she was trapped, not just in that care home, but in time itself, watching her life replay each cycle a little more frayed, a little more desperate. And I think she saw me not as I am, but as I will be, or was in some other version of this story. I've met others who worked at that care home. People I tracked down through old staff rosters. They don't like to talk about it, but when I mention Miss Adelaide, their eyes change. One woman, a nurse who left in 2015, told me she still dreams of the boy in the photograph. "He's not her grandson," she whispered. "He's her." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. Sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I feel the care home around me. The cold linoleum, the buzz of the lights, the weight of eyes I can't see. I hear her song, and I know she's still there in room 214, waiting. Not for me, but for the next one. Because that's the worst part, isn't it? The idea that it's not over. That we're all caught in the same loop, hearing the same song, walking the same halls, until we finally open the door. We're not supposed to, and when I do, I know what I'll find. Miss Adelaide, humming her eyes, shining in the dark. "You've been here before," she'll say. And this time, I won't run.